on this auspicious day, the 1st of May. It is Beltane, which is a midpoint festival, which is very exciting. It means, the light is growing and coming. On this day, May 1st, is when Aragorn was king, or crowned king, of the reuniting of the kingdoms in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. It's also the birthday of one of my spiritual heroes, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who would have been 141 years old today. And everything else that's going on as well. So, what is on your spice cabinet? What an interesting entree into a talk. And I was thinking about that coming here to this morning. And again, truth in advertising, I go by the motto, never let a talk title get in the way with what you're going to say. So, but at least mention it in a cursory manner. But I thought about this because, it's like, first of all, what is a spice? What is a spice? Is it an herb? Is it a seed? Is it a this? Is it that? Because there's certain things that I use for spices. As Marjorie was talking at the very beginning of service, spring is here, and so our herb garden is just like in full bloom right now. It's fabulous. Basil and thyme and oregano and marjoram and lavender and roses and all of that. So, spices are used to preserve. Spices are used to enhance. Two favorites, if you want to know what's in my spice rack that I kind of are my go-tos on almost anything is cardamon. I love cardamon. Cardamon is in coffee. I don't drink a lot of coffee recreationally, mostly. But it's fabulous. I put cardamom in my oatmeal. I love it. And saffron is also good as well. But as far as enhancers, there are so many things that enhance our things. And what I want to talk about today is not so much a spice, but a letter that I would like to use to spice up this talk. Pretty good, huh? So the letter is B. And we're going to use B to talk about a couple things. We're going to use B to talk about the Bible, to talk about books, to talk about ballet, and to talk about beans. So let's get started. So the first thing that I want to say is this, is that we are kind of on the heels of Easter and all the festivals that are in there. But there's this wonderful story in the book of Acts. And Rob Bell, who wrote a great book called What is the Bible, does kind of a fun riff on it. But essentially, it is in the book of Acts. It's in the 11th chapter, I think, for those keeping score. So the story begins with Peter coming back to Jerusalem, and there's quite a big to-do. There's a lot of drama going on because Peter had evidently had dinner with some Gentiles. Not only did he have dinner with them, but he had dinner with them in their house. So a little bit of context here. In first century Palestine, there were, for the Jews, there were certain purity laws that they held. And Jews aren't unique to this. Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, Christians shouldn't, but do. But there are certain purity laws. The whole Torah was written or given as a way for people who have lived in bondage to learn to live free. And there's all these prescriptions on it. Some are really quite interesting. But there are these certain laws about dietary things and what's clean and unclean, and on it goes. But one of the things about this was, certainly there's rules of diet, which are still practiced by some forms of Judaism. And there's also things about who's clean and unclean, meaning that for a first century Palestinian Jew, you were not allowed to touch somebody who was not Jewish. Not only were you not allowed to touch them, you couldn't even go into their house. So that's the setting. And so the setting is that Peter had traveled, and Peter was a good Jew. Peter wasn't a Christian. They hadn't existed yet. He was a Jew, and he was a practicing Jew. He was from a small fishing town by the name of Cardamon, and he practiced purity laws, and he practiced all these things because really the early Jesus movement really was an extension of what Judaism was and what Judaism was evolving to. So this is where Peter was, and he was visiting the town of Joppa, and at the end of whatever he was doing that day, he was quite hungry, and he had gone up to the roof of the house in which he was staying as a guest. And it says that he slipped into a trance. The Greek word is where we get the word ecstasy, ekstasios. And so he goes into this ecstatic experience, and in this, he sees this large sheet, like a picnic blanket, descend, and on it are all kinds of animals. There's four-legged animals, there's birds, there's reptiles, there's serpents, there's you name it is on this big sheet in this trance that he's seeing. And he hears a voice say to him, Peter, kill and eat. So Peter's response is this, wait a minute, I can't do that. He's basically saying, not me, I only eat grass-fed, I only shop at Whole Foods, man, if it's not organic, I don't do it, and I've got all these things. And then he says this, which is a great kicker, he says, my religion keeps me from doing this. Now, he's having a conversation with God, and what he is saying to God is, I'm sorry, God, I can't obey you because my religion forbids me from following that. 12th century mystic Meister Eckhart says, in time, our greatest obstacle to God is our belief in God. Because what we perceive God to be predicates how we perceive the universe that we live in, which influences how we think, which influences how we take action, right? Perception, thought, word, expression. That's the formula. And so what Peter is saying is this, I can't expand any further because I am holding a belief about something. And the voice says to him, by the way, the voice says to him 3 times. So, and again, when we read scripture, whether it be the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita, whether it's the Torah, the Talmud, or the Quran, wrong question, how could this be? Because that's not how these things are written. Right question, what does it mean? Interesting question is, why did they write this down? So, 3 times it's said, and then the voice says, do not call anything unclean which I have made pure. Boom. Comes out of the trance, shakes his head, what? And then there's a knock on the door, and these Romans say, our master wants you to come to his house and speak with him. And so Peter goes. And what Peter says is this. He said, my religion forbids me from coming into your house. But I've had this amazing experience just recently, and what's for dinner? In he goes. So here's the thing that's interesting about this, right? Is so first of all, let's ask ourselves this question. What happened to Peter? What happened? He had a disruption. Something moved from orderly in his life to completely disorder, which gives him an opportunity for a reorder. Yes? And so before, his life was constrained to a certain prescription of how things could be, and now his life is open to new possibilities which are there. Before, he was judgmental because he was holding a belief. Now he is curious about what can be. Before he's closed, now he's teachable, and his world begins to expand. Do you see how cool this really is, and how this can be for so many of us? Order, disorder, reorder, a disruption. So in many ways, we should welcome these things because they invite us to look or ask the question, is this necessary? The great law of the universe, as Pierre Teilhard would say, is the law of evolution. So we're always, in a sense, being corrected. So there's this astrologer that I love. His name is Christopher Renstrom, and I was listening to him talk the other day, and he was talking about his husband, and his husband is the artistic director of the Utah Ballet Company or something like that. And I'm not a big ballet fan. I'm not against it. My center is in Fallbrook, California. We have avocados and coyotes and chickens. We don't have a ballet. But, I like it, I suppose. I've seen the Nutcracker, Tchaikovsky. But I'm not a big ballet person. But I like Christopher Renstrom, and his husband is an artistic director. And what his husband said to him, which I think is really interesting, he says, the whole practice of ballet is correction. He says, if you go into a ballet studio, you will see that they have big mirrors on the walls. And it's not because they're vain, but it's because they're always looking how to perfect their craft. But isn't that true with each and every one of us? Whatever form of art you practice, whatever your craft is we're always looking how to improve. So there's always a level of critique that happens there. And what he says is, in ballet, there's essentially three ways that practitioners of ballet respond to the critique. And that is, they accept it, they deny it, or they say, I'm the worst dancer in the world, and quit. So, it's kind of like all of us, right? How do we, when disruption comes, respond? How do we, when there is a correction, a lost diamond, or whatever the case may be, how do we respond? So one way to respond is to accept it. In the science of mind and spirit, the very principle of new thought is self-responsibility, to kind of accept what's there and not give way to magical thinking and start making stuff up about it, but to simply say this is what is. Because unless we own it, we can't change it, right? We can't pretend it away. We treat it away, which is a mental science. It's a practice that we do. To accept critique, disruption, is to be curious. It's to ask the question, what can I learn from this? What can I learn from this? How can I grow from this experience? I can be curious. I can be open. I can be expansive. I can be teachable. The second way is to deny it. And to deny it really is kind of like Peter. It's to be in judgment. Well, that doesn't refer to me. They say the definition of privilege is, it's not a problem unless it's a problem for me. Which is kind of where we live in the world that we do today. But to deny is to remain unteachable, fixed, closed, stuck, small. Raina Marie Wilkie says this: let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me. Nearby is the country they call life. You will know it by its seriousness. So the third way is shame. And what I want to offer is this, is there are some impediments that we need to take care of before we can do something else. And if shame is an experience that triggers you whenever there's disruption, whenever there's change, get support. Allow yourself to be loved into wholeness. Shame is insidious. It's destructive. It's not our natural state of being. Shame is the belief that there's something innately broken within us. You know, the entire book of Genesis is essentially two themes. One theme is this, is that God created everything. And what that essentially means is whatever you define God to be, whatever name you want to use. I personally like to use the word God because I know it triggers people. You know, if you're getting blown away or having a faith crisis because I say a word, are you accepting, denying, or shaming? So in the book of Genesis, one of the tenets of the book of Genesis is this, is God creates all things, which means that God has a relationship with all things. Nothing is outside of this divine presence that loves each and every aspect of its creation, which, by the way, is applicable to the person sitting in your seat. That's you. The second thing is covenant, and covenant is all about God's fidelity. But, so, how do we respond to disruption? Where do we go with this? And again, Rainer Maria Rilke says this. He says, "Therefore, my friend, I know of no other advice than this. Go within and scale the depths of your being, from which your very life springs forth. At its source, you will find the answer to the question." Now, disruptions offer opportunities for change. But my advice is not to go looking for disruptions. There are plenty that will come on their own. So what else can we do? We can cultivate habits. Habits. We can train our mind to think in certain ways. We can let the unconscious become conscious. And when it is conscious, there is a level of freedom. So, one of my favorite books is Think and Grow Rich. Do you remember Think and Grow Rich? Right, when the first time you read it? So I am the person who read Think and Grow Rich in complete anxiety, because he says at the very beginning, I'm going to offer you a secret, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. You have to find it for yourself because that's the way that it is. And I'm thinking, I'm never going to find the secret. I'm the one that's going to be left behind. Right? So, but Napoleon Hill, in one of his other writings, says this about habits. We are ruled by habits, all of us. Our habits are fastened upon us by repetition of thought and experience. Therefore, we can control our earthly destinies just to the extent that we control our thoughts. Breathe that in for a second. We can control our destinies to the degree that we can control our thoughts. And habitual thinking is called a belief. So we can cultivate our beliefs. And if we have a belief that is no longer working for us, we don't have to keep it. We can replace it with a more salient, workable, elegant belief. And what I want to offer is in the school of metaphysics, there is one belief, one habit that is the beginning of all habits. It is the cornerstone by which we build our spiritual, emotional, psychic, and physical sense. There is a secret that we can learn as a habit that will build every other one there, and I'm going to give it to you. It is this. It is the cultivation of a positive mental attitude. It is the cultivation of a positive mental attitude, which means we watch ourselves, and when we get into catastrophizing, we dial it back a few and think again, something different, something possible. Maybe we even repeat like a mantra, something that Ernest Holmes gave us. I am a center of divine consciousness within the vast whole. I grew up Roman Catholic. It was a good experience for me, really. One of the gifts that it gave me was the memory of prayer. And memory work is so important. I see this also as a Freemason, but there are those moments in our life when we may feel lost or blown away, or we feel that we don't have a resource, but we can go into the library of our mind and select in our catalog of thoughts, mantras, memories, and prayers a tool. I am a center of divine consciousness within the vast whole. A positive mental attitude changes everything, because how we perceive is how we think is how we speak is how we create. That's the formula. Simple. Not easy. Simple. So in William Hornaday's book, there's this lovely, lovely book. I'm not sure if it's in print anymore, but it was a book called Your Aladdin's Lamp. And it was written by William Hornaday, and it was about him and Dr. Holmes and the early days of the whole movement and where they were. And he tells this story. He says, Dr. Holmes one time receives this call from this doctor who says, my wife is hysterical. She says, I am a negative person, and I'm not. But she says that if I don't come see you, she's going to divorce me. So, would you be so kind as to call my hysterical wife and tell her that I am fine and all is well? And the story is Dr. Holmes said, no, you got to come see me. So they meet, and Dr. Holmes meets with him and then says this. I'm going to give you a little bit of homework. True story, apparently, in this book. He says, I want you to go back to the office, and on your way back to the office, I want you to stop at the store and buy a bean pot and a bag of beans, and tell your employees that if they ever hear anything negative coming out of your mouth, they are to put a bean in the pot. So the man says, well, I'm going to get divorced if I don't, so I will. And the story is, later that afternoon, he calls Dr. Holmes, and he is laughing because he says the pot is overflowing with beans. How do you accept critique? Do you take responsibility? Do you deny, or do you shame? For this man, the beans was a teaching way. Maybe I should change the way I speak. Maybe I should change the way I think. Maybe I should change how I see things. So, to spice up your life a little bit today, I offer you 4 B's: the Bible, ballet, books, and beans. Thank you for your kind attention.